has 10 classrooms, separated by, in some cases, a couple of hours drive. So I'm a DP for 40 staff. So in early childhood, my work, I've taught in early childhood for the last 36 years. And in that time, it's solely been in the world of play. So I had the fortune of having this remarkable conversation with a teacher in an area school going, yeah, play. And it was probably the first time that we had really started to talk and hear anyone wanting to talk about play as an initiative in our primary and secondary structures. So we leapt at the chance to start talking and chatting and trying to begin at the beginning. So we ran a session not long after that for a whole group of teachers called Tairawhiti 101, just to give them some basic understanding of some of the differences that we work with in early childhood and how that might give guidance and clues for our primary colleagues. And I suppose one of the areas that we looked at was quite clearly, we've been doing it so long that it sometimes becomes quite difficult to explain when someone is asking a new question like, but they just leave the place in an absolute uproar. What do we do? And for us, that was long ago solved. We get the children to clean up. And that sounds so easy. And I know how hard that is.
Hey, David, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit because I just turned the record button on. And,
okay.
So they would have missed the piece about how I met you. I met David because there's going to be a lot of people that will watch this, so I want them to understand the context. I met David when I first started play at Tikaraka Area School, and we have a friend who we both know, but I didn't know David at that time, and she introduced me. She brought him out to school. We sat in a boardroom, and I remember saying, I've turned my classroom into what I think is a kindergarten. Can you tell me more about play? I pretty much don't know whether I'm doing it right, or I just wanted some affirmation, and that was the beginning of a really rich relationship. And I've continued to meet with David throughout the few years that I've been in play, and always come out with something that is amazing. So I was just saying before I pressed the record button that I was hoping to be challenged tonight, and I want to invite you too, that if you have any questions, feel free to button, open up your mic and talk, or you can type into the bar on the right hand side, which says chat. So yeah. Okay, David, let's start with what we said we'd talk about here on this webinar, and
sure.
That was the whole thing about free play versus adulterated play. And I can assure you, as I think you know, teachers, educators have a little bit of a problem about free play. Actually, parents do as well. Because I've heard it even in this last couple of weeks. My child is just playing. They're not learning. So can you, on your journey, like you've only known play, can you give us a little bit of a definition?
Sure. So free play goes right back to the early 1930s when a lady came out from the UK called Susan Isaacs, and she spoke at the New Education Conference that was held in Tamaki Makaurau. And she talked about the 16 areas of play, and then started to talk about what free play was. And free play in early childhood is children choosing and directing where they wish to play, with what within the environment they wish to play with, and with whom. They set the agenda, they set the rules, and the adult supports. So if you can imagine theatre, and you've got a play about to perform, you are the stage manager. You are the prop manager. You are sound and lighting. You are publications. You are selling of the tickets. But you are not the actor. The child is. So as we've gone over the last 5 years or so down this journey, Tara, about play, and I followed many of the comments within the forum that you run, and some of those comments I can pass, and some of those comments I just can't. So for any of you who have commented or I've commented on, my apologies now, but I'm quite passionate about play. And one of the concerns that we have is an overriding need or a desire for our teaching colleagues in other service types other than early childhood to adulterate things, to make things seem important by changing the language, by adding terminology that isn't actually necessary, rather than fronting up and saying what things are. So we talk about play. We don't call it learning through play. It's play. Loose parts. That's an interesting piece of language. It almost suggests clean and tidy. Loose parts in early childhood is actually called junk play. Junk isn't seen as a negative word. It's seen as very positive, exciting materials that children can utilize in unique and different ways. So we've become quite concerned about how play is being morphed into something that's quite homogenized, quite clean, quite tidy, uniform. So forum posts that I've sometimes jumped in on are things like, oh, I've been doing play from 9 o'clock. Do you think it's okay to let it run till 10? Because then we've got to really get into the reading and the writing and some of that other real stuff. And it's like, hold it. This isn't what I remember 36 years ago as developmental moments. I'm not sure if any of you on here are old enough to remember, but back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, primary schools went down a developmental model where for a half hour or even an hour sometimes they allowed developmental time. And that was, again, primary schools' models around making play seem more important. I suppose what I would say to you is the first thing I need to fess up is I've been teaching for 36 years, but I'm no expert. I'm still learning, and I hope that continues. So what I share tonight with you guys is my view of the world. You don't have to agree with it. And I hope that you take on your own ways of thinking about things. So what I would say to you, though, is I think you've been sold an empty bushel by the powers that be that run you. I think you've been taught to give no credit to anything unless it is evidence-based. But all of you are feeling people, you are feeling creatures. You know when it feels right, when something feels wrong, when something seems appropriate, when something doesn't seem appropriate. But there's no evidence to back that up. So you don't work in your world based on evidence. You work on your world based on how it engages with you. But we've run down this road where our primary colleagues are told, unless it's evidence-based, it's not real. Curiosity, you also can't evidence for me. You can't quantify it, qualify it in particular ways. So all of those advantageous aspects of education that are often seen as the lesser important aspects, such as how do I establish and maintain a friendship? How do I express myself so that I can communicate my needs to others and have my needs met? Those things are very soft skill sets. And sometimes I think under the evidence-based model, we sort of forget that. Okay, so let's come back to free play. Okay, so free play. Sorry, tangent, Tara. Free play is very much child-led, and then our response to it. So in early childhood, for years and years, we've always had posters that say, it is the process, not the product. But in our mechanisms around Aero and everything else, it is about outcomes, which is actually the product, not the process. So free play is very much about the process. And I suppose one of the challenges I often talk to the primary colleagues that I work with up here in Tairawhiti is a question that's useful for some teachers, not all. And it goes something like this. What comes first? Teaching or learning? And often when we ask that, we get a clear sense of whether this person understands and will fit into a play-based model. So we have primary colleagues that apply for positions within our organisation, and often they will say, well, teaching comes first. Cool. So now we know that the teacher presents, the child learns, and so the dance continues. When we talk to early childhood teachers, they will often say, oh, I'm not sure, maybe it's the teaching that comes first. Okay. Sorry, don't think you're going to cut it for us. What we're wanting to know is that the teacher sees learning first. So a child will show me through play learning. And then the teaching part is my response to that learning I have just seen. And then so the dance continues. So instead of the teacher being the dance partner who leads, the child is. The difficulty is I don't know if it's going to be a foxtrot or a boogie. And that's where I have to be ready to focus my attention and work differently, depending on the child or what's in front of me. Play as a methodology is used by us so that children are engaged. Children are working within materials and ideas that give them similar learning, whether they're in the sandpit, the water play, or the blocks. All of the same types of learning are available in all 16 areas of play. And I'm more than happy to go through those 16 areas shortly. So it allows children to learn alongside their peers and then teachers to choose where they intervene, where they put their energies. Otherwise, what we end up with is what I see in a lot of primary schools, where the teacher is trying to run a classroom, trying to manage it, keep it calm. Children are coming up. Children are, is it my turn to read? Is it my turn to do this? I'm trying to do this. I'm marking this. I'm looking at that. And the teacher gets pulled apart. That means they can't give any child the time necessary to build those strengths that they need. So we use play. So our philosophies in early childhood are theories-based, and our theories go back hundreds of years. So if I was to look at European theorists that have influenced our practices, it would be people like Montessori. It would be people like Steiner. It would be people like Froebel and Isaacs and the Macmillan sisters. It would be, if I looked at America, it would be people like Gardner. It would be people, Costa. People that shape our thinking slightly differently because they come from a worldview where they have tried to create pseudosciences. So we've got one where it was very much about a naturalistic intent from the European model, and then we're influenced by the psychological model from the Americans. So we've got all of that coming together in Aotearoa, and then within we have an Indigenous theory. And a lot of that is expressed through, God, names are going out of my head, I'm getting old. Rangamare, Rose Pere, and Te Wheke. So in Te Wheke, well, there's a description of education, that education is not a snake.
Right.
You don't start at one end and go right down.
Yeah.
It's more like an octopus.
Right.
Lots of arms going everywhere.
Yeah.
And so Rangamare Rose Pere uses Te Wheke as her analogy for education and that process. We've also got Tapawhā model from health that gives us some information about what we might choose to do within this. We've got Te Whatu Pōkeka, which is an assessment theory.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that.
Yeah, so I suppose, so I suppose a typical teacher in early childhood may have a blending of 20 or 30 different theories, not complete. Not all of Maria Montessori's works do I agree with, but there are enough elements in there that I choose to take on some of her richness around making sure that children know how to perform a task so that they can perform it in their own way independently. So things like tidy up time can be tracked directly back to some of Maria's work.
Okay. Wow.
Our use of block play and mathematics within blocks and using unit blocks to teach that comes from Frederick Froebel's work, where one of his 10 gifts to early childhood, actually 10 gifts to kindergarten, he was the one who set up the first kindergarten, was a set of unit blocks. And he said that over time children had to go through all 10 gifts to build up knowledges and skills and strategies to live in this world.
Hey, after this is finished, do you mind, there was just somebody who wanted for us to write those theorists down.
Oh yeah, look, yeah.
Maybe we could just do that on the Facebook page afterwards.
Sure.
Just if you could just jot down what those people are. Hey, I love listening to you. It's really good. I was just wondering, well, first of all, you make me remember how much I don't know. But you can only learn, you learn as you go along. Chunks. And then you change your practice and you apply it. I've got this wee video clip that I recorded today, something quite remarkable that happened. I was just wondering, you know how you said that you can, in the different types of play, you can see the same learning?
Yep.
Could we have a look at it and you comment on it?
Sure.
Okay. I'll see if I can make it work because I have to share.
Good luck.
I have to share my desktop. I think it's this one. Let's see if it works. Tell me if you see this. Oh, can you see it?
I can. A young man with a cable reel.
Okay. Watch. Oops, wrong way. This is when I first saw it, what I stupidly said or not.
Did you fill it? That's so cool. Okay, show me again.
Okay, now I'm going to share it back. Stop share. Oh, look at that. Hey, I feel empowered. It was just one of those things. I walked out and saw these lines and saw them on there. And I was like, oh my goodness. But I'm kind of like, I don't know that I'm prepared to know what to do with it.
Okay, so when I looked at that, I saw three, well, there's more. There are sort of probably four key areas. One is the social connectedness that he had with the teacher, a willingness to want to show and share.
Right.
Okay, so you could put your energies and focus into more relational understanding and more strategies around. So how would you share this idea with another teacher that you didn't know as well as me? What strategies might you use? So you're trying to take the idea and stretch it a little. So that's one thought. The second thought was he was certainly making, or potentially going to start moving into, or could move into, pattern making. So at the moment he's rolling it, and by accident some of the stuff is falling out. He's noticed it and he's repeating that. But he has yet to make that connection about, how would I make curves and intersecting lines? And if I wanted to try and create some imagery that could be represented or perceived by others, what would I have to do? What techniques could I employ? What if there were two cable reels? What if there were two people? What if there were... And so all of a sudden you are starting to open up his thinking about, I was just rolling the cable reel. I thought this was pretty cool, but now could I think about those larger aspects? So that was another one I saw. The other one,
before you say the next one,
sorry,
let's go back to the adulting. So this isn't you could just walk away from it.
Oh yeah, you could, and you could keep it as a privatized moment,
and he's still learning something,
and he's still learning.
What I did, like, I want to go back to what you said, but this is the thing, how do you know when to intervene? I was so excited, I go, how come there's straight lines from a round thing? I just blurted it out, because it's like, right. That's what came to me, and then he stopped and he came down and he had a look.
Okay, so think about it this way. Did you know the answer to your question?
Not in that I could say in words.
Cool.
I did in concept, because I could see it happening.
Yes.
I looked at it closely.
But did you ask a question that you already knew the answer to?
No.
Cool.
I didn't know the answer.
Then a really simple way of thinking about adulteration is, if instead you had said, oh my goodness, how many lines have you made on the concrete with me? You already know the answer. You weren't genuinely a partner in play. You were the teacher, shifting it back to what you perceive to be important. Now, when you start thinking about things like pattern making, oh, okay, so how would you even make a circle with that? Now, I'd only ask that if I honestly didn't know. Because as soon as I know, I'm taking over who leads this. Now, I'm also throwing in the question. So if I know the answer, I'm going to drive my own agenda.
What's so wrong with that?
My own agenda will come back to what I think education is, not what he's already learning. So it will come back to, dependent on the teacher, reading, writing, arithmetic, to put it bluntly. And you know me,
Also,
I've never been subtle.
This is good. No, it's good. This is very good. Okay, so or was I thinking of the science and the physics and the maths?
Right. So another area that you could move toward is trajectory.
Yeah.
How do you know where you might end up on this? How come it appears that you're doing the same thing, but the lines are shifting? What's making the shifting of the lines when you appear to be doing the same thing each time? So you're starting to ask questions of him to start thinking and possibly exploring, not you. You've done your learning. It's his turn.
Dang it all.
And then there's some thinking around that you could start thinking about spatial understandings. How does he fit within a three-dimensional piece of space? So how was he moving his feet? How do you know to move those feet in that particular way to get that particular object working in the way he did? Now, he might just turn around and say, oh, well, I just know.
Yeah.
Wow. So if you were going to teach someone else to do that,
right.
How would you do that? So I come back to a thing I shared with you a while ago, and it's a statement that I often use with a lot of teachers, and it's about, in early childhood, we think about our kids being capable and competent. It's one of our key drivers of our curriculum. They're not capable once they start with us or when they finish with us. That's not an end result. They are before they arrive.
Yes, I agree.
So they're capable and competent. And a question that I often ask early childhood teachers as well, to make sure they're really thinking about play, is never do for a child what they're capable of doing for themselves. So what is it today that you have done for a child in your care, in your charge, that actually they could have done for themselves? Maybe with your guidance, but for themselves. They do not need adults doing the learning for them. So in early childhood, to give you an example, that would be a teacher that you might see cutting up paper, getting it ready on a shelf. Because good God, we wouldn't want our children to learn to use scissors. Or mixing paint so that the paints are ready. Well, why can't children mix paints? And why can't they choose what paints they want and when they want it? And why can't they start creating the paints they want? Or is it always something that has to be prepared for them, created for them? And when I look in some of my colleagues' spaces in primary schools, I see things like the moment before they were 5, they might have looked outside and seen a rainbow and created an image that they felt represented and was symbolic of a rainbow. Now, it may not have had any curve in it, and it may not have had any particular colours in it. The day after they're 5, in some spaces they walk in, and here is a cutout with 7 spaces ready to colour in rainbow stencil. Because our children, by the time they start our schools, in some schools, aren't seen as already capable and competent. These are our leaders that leave early childhood. These are our big kids, and they're amazing. And I recently heard a new entrant teacher say, well, at school we work, so there'll be no more of that play stuff. And remember, oh, come on, you're our babies. They're not babies. They haven't been babies for 5 years. They are our young children, of, I suppose, thinking about the possibilities. So we often talk about possible lines of direction or possible lines of thinking. So from that one video, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible lines of direction that you as the teacher could think about quickly in your head and then decide which one you think was mostly or was as closely genuine to the child's initial desire, because that's what they're interested in, and then take them on a journey with you.
Yeah.
Now, midway through that journey, you could see them, they might wane from that idea. They might go, oh, would she just back off and leave me alone? You call it even at that point.
Yeah.
You leave it.
Yeah.
So some lines disappear within moments. Some, I'll give you an example. 2 young boys playing. They were both 4.5-year-olds. They were fighting with each other, getting quite rough and physical with it. And one turned around and really smacked this other kid hard on the chin. It was an awesome blow. Anyway, teachers panicking around me going, we have to stop the fight, we have to stop the fight. And I said, well, it's easy. You just sit down in between them. So that was cool. Our kid size, easy. Adult sits down, fight stops. And I said, guys, what's happening? He told me that my heart looks like this, the stylized shape of a heart. And it doesn't, David. And I said, oh, okay, so let's all come together. Let's keep all the kids together because we've got to maintain ratios for the ministry. And we sent a teacher up to the local abattoir. We were lucky, it was a rural town, but there was an abattoir in town. And we shot up there, and they came back with an ox heart. And it was still warm, so it was still doing this sort of fibrillation, just ever so slightly, and they could see. So these kids are looking at this heart in my hand, and all the blood is dripping down the arm. And the kids are going, wow, but what's inside? Cool question. How could we find out? Well, we'll need a knife. So shot off to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife we had, and we cut inside the heart, and they were starting to have a look. And then these original two boys go, yeah, but how does that help? And I said, what do you mean? Well, you know, when you're looking at something. How does that help when you're looking at something? Yeah, you know, how does that help us know how we see? Are you wanting to know about how we see? Yeah. How does an eye work? Okay, and so what happened, the long and the short, was then it was, well, what about bones? And what about other parts of the organs? And what about? So by contacting the local high school and getting the torso mannequin from the bio department, St. John's ambulance came in with a mannequin of all of the bones, so a skeleton. That project continued over 6 months. Now, during that time, we had our high school petition us to stop because we were getting into areas of biology that were inappropriate because they don't first come across those until high school in the third form. We had the local primary school going, I'm not sure if there's any learning here.
Wow.
And we continued. Our parents were completely on board. We were always upfront with them. We kept them in the loop by actually putting out the stories so that they could see what their children were doing and could contribute. Now, we had kids wanting to dissect frogs. We had, you name it, we had it. We had roadkill coming in. Look, David, I found a rabbit. Can it come alive again? Well, I don't know. Shall we try? What do you think we need to work on here? So we had all manner of exploration. And I suppose in Play and in Tairawhiti, which is the sort of the founding document underneath the curriculum framework, it is about from where a child is. We take them from where they are. And wherever a child is the space that we start with. So your lines of possibility here are quite rich from just that cable reel instance. And by the way, can I say how fabulous to see cable reels in a school again? Okay? For too long they were missing. And for some of us, we remember taking races in cable reels all over the school. So well done. So I think it's looking into and going, this doesn't set what I planned. So you'll already understand that play isn't something that you plan in the way that a teacher may be expected to plan currently. It's not a lesson plan. What we do in early childhood and how we plan for play is in the environment. We establish an environment that invites play. So if you're wanting to know about the 16 areas of play, some of the Play Centre publications are some of the best. But the 16 areas of play were gifted to us by Susan Isaacs. Now, back in that day, Susan, in 1930s, Susan came from inner London. So one of the areas of play is Play-Doh. Now, Play-Doh, and I've seen some of the blogs going, oh my God, how do you get the bloody stuff out of the carpet? Don't put it on. Make sure that your environment is linoed and you have small squares of carpet where you need them, rather than carpet and then trying to put lino on the top. because it gets past that small piece of lino and gets embedded. If you use a salt dough mix though, it does dry out and you can scrape it off and vacuum it up. But it's some of the alum or the cornflour mixes and stuff just are awful. And I'm an early childhood teacher. I've been making it for 36 years, dear God. So Play-Doh, of course, back in the day when Susan talked to everyone about it, was quite typical, because in London, in London at that time, you'd be making your daily bread. And if you're making bread, you know that if you've got preschoolers with you, the only way of entertaining them is to give them some of the dough and let them go for it. But since then, we've made it with lots of oil, we've made it with alum, we've put glitter in the bloody stuff, we've coloured it, we've done all sorts of things to it. And no longer do we just make plain, ordinary bread dough. But bread dough works.
Yeah, that would be the best.
So the 16 area, sorry, Tara.
Oh, well, I was just wondering, so what are some of the learning that you could, the threads that you could get out of Play-Doh?
Oh, it depends on what they're choosing to do with the Play-Doh. That's the problem. So for all the threads, so you've got all your dramatic play can come out of it. You're wanting rich language at all times. So it is the squishing and the squelching and the rolling and the thumping. So all of the language that you can feed in is best. If kids are just doing, I'm going to roll it and I'm going to curl it and I'm going to make a coil pot, then they have seen an adult do that, because that is not something naturally that they would start doing with Play-Doh. They might with clay, but not Play-Doh, because you can't actually pinch it to make it work that way. But I'll give you an example. Sitting at the Play-Doh table the other day, working with a group of kids, they were talking about what they were doing in the weekend, and all I did was, oh, I'm so hungry. I need a mandarin. And that's all I said. And they were just talking. I was talking. You know, no one was really listening to each other.
Yeah.
Rolled up some Play-Doh. And then I started peeling it and putting each piece down on the table. And suddenly they stopped. And they started looking. What are you doing? Oh, nothing, carry on. Peeling. What are you peeling? Oh, it's okay. I'm just a bit hungry. I'm going to have some mandarin. But it's not a mandarin. But it is in my head. Carried on peeling, and then I took a piece and I went, mandarin's off. And put the whole mandarin aside. And within moments, they were starting to think about what they might create with the Play-Doh. Now, if they'd started creating mandarins, I would have squashed mine and walked away. Because I don't want them to mimic, I want them to create. Because as soon as they get into that creation process, I can decide whether I intervene again and if I'm needed there or not. So what we know is they can create spatial understandings, they can problem solve, they have to communicate for needed purpose, they have to start establishing rules within games that they're playing between each other, so all of that negotiation, conflict resolution. They also have to consider what happens in regards to self-regulation and maintaining rules and koa that is in place. So do I have to worry if I eat it and spit it out? Do I have to worry if it's on the floor? Do I have to consider who might use it next? When they leave, how do they leave it ready and established so that someone else is invited to play? Or do they just leave it in a complete mess, ready for someone else to deal with someone else's mess? No one wants to play in a mess. So the 16 areas of play that we talk about are water play.
Yep.
So all of the same learning happens in water play, except you end up with a few more. And so you've got the pouring, you've got the ability to consider how water fills shapes, and all of the conservation skills that occur. Now, we know conservation skills aren't embedded much before the age of 7 and 8. So that means they have to be continually worked on all the way through.
Mm.
Otherwise, you end up like some of us who have very poor conservation skills going, no, this will easily overflow that bottle.
Or,
And it doesn't. So we've got,
or you can just pretend and they can learn it by rote, which is why you get into the problem you do get into of overflowing a wine glass. Oops. Can everyone else still hear me? You've frozen up. Can other people hear me? Yep, he's disappeared on us.
hello again. Can you tell your Okay, Tara, no sound from you.
Got ya. Here I am.
Okay,
I can hear you though.
awesome. I was wondering for a minute.
The internet's unstable like us.
Oh yeah, completely unstable like you. Okay, not like me.
No.
No, completely balanced. Okay, so the 16 areas are water play,
Yep.
sand play,
Yes.
science and nature go together, puzzles and manipulative play, dough, physically active play, like your young man on the cable reel,
Mm-hmm.
painting,
Mm-hmm.
collage,
Mm.
music,
Mm-hmm.
messy play. Now, messy play is things like finger paint and foam and all of that glorious, goo. Music. Oh, I'd see that one. Sociodramatic play, which includes family play, occupational play, and superhero play. Clay, carpentry, and yes, we use real tools, we use drills, we use all sorts of things. Books and storytelling, and much more focus on storytelling than books. Blocks and junk play. Oh, you'd call it loose parts. And probably been added to it, but whether you agree with it or not, would be ICT.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and there's others that people have over the times added to, so we do lots of copying and those sorts of things as well. But
Okay.
I think within all of that you can.
Someone's asked, what's the difference between Play-Doh and clay?
Right, so Play-Doh and clay, there's a textural difference of all things. What I would say to you in this country is I would steer away from from Play-Doh, and I would use clay. And the reason is it's part of this land. So there's a whole series of learning that you do with your children about where you go and get it. You certainly don't order it in an art order and have it delivered from Nelson or from other parts of the Motu. You actually go outside and you dig a hole, hopefully with your caretaker's permission, and you start looking for clay. Or you drive through a cutting of the road and you look for where clay may be. And you start building up knowledges of what the land is around you. And your children gather it. So it's just big, chunky, bouldery type, hard, solid pieces at that stage. And then they have to learn how to break it down, add water to it, allow it to mature, keep on processing it, molding it every day, pushing it through every day, reconstituting it every day, till it gets to a point where it's malleable. And all of that process is all about clay. Now, clay does something interesting to the hand. It dries on it. And as it does, it sucks the water out of your skin. I'm sure one of your children will notice it. When they notice it, they've then got a question. You know where you need to go next. And so suddenly you're moving from clay into science. You've got all of the how will we get to where we're going, how will we find our clay, how will we map it, then the logistics of how do we get there, what tools will we need, does the caretaker have anything useful? So you've got all of those processes, so it's about the process, it's not about finally having the clay. Although having said that, clay is an open-ended material, the same as all of these other materials, that doesn't have a prescriptive way that it has to be used. Dough, on the other hand, I'm not a fan of dough, and the reason is that it's actually using food sources that I believe our whānau, who have very little in the cupboard, would find quite strange that we're choosing to use food sources to play with. So we don't do macaroni. We don't do any food sources that could be feeding whānau, to be honest. So dough, yeah.
Okay, so that's really great to be reminded of all those different areas of play. We've only got another 10 minutes. So
cool.
Has anyone got any questions that they want to ask? I've got one here from Greg who emailed me.
Remind me what Greg wanted. Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Did somebody speak? No. Okay. So Greg basically said, I'm interested to hear views on play-based learning versus free play opportunities at breaks in primary schools. Well, I think we've covered that. Apprehensions, fears of, and not knowing how to introduce or manage risky natural elements, environmental and large loose parts play.
Okay. So
very real.
So large loose parts play is actually junk play. It's large cable reels, it's tires, it's all sorts of things. Now, in the rest of the world, when we play with these things, we call that CrossFit. Okay, and some of us, you can tell, don't do CrossFit. But I take your point around the fear and the apprehension. So I'm a teacher, Greg, who works in early childhood, and I advocate elemental play. So play with air, water, earth, and fire. We light fires with our kids. We cook with our fires. We create food. We create social times and gatherings. Now, if I've been doing that successfully since they were 2, and every day we've been doing that, then they build up quite a strong knowledge around what the risks are, because every day we're repeating what our colour is, what our considered rules are. We would have a specific space where it occurs. There would be permanent seating around it to make sure that no one could topple a chair over or fall off a log toward the flame, etc. There'd be a gap between the flame where you stretch your hand out, and if you can feel your hand is warm, you're close enough. If your hand feels hot by being stretched out, you're a bit too close. So giving some ability for them to manage the environment if an adult wasn't there. Now, having said that, never left unattended. What's our rule about when we leave it? It has to be put out, pour water on it, but it's still hot. So it can't be unattended until it's cold. That means either more water on it or another way of solving that dilemma. But let's say they've done that for 3 years before they arrived at school, and let's say, Greg, that you're in the early years of a primary school. If they don't then get fire for another 2 years, 3 years, what happens to their sense of mastery? If you don't do something for a long period of time, yes, you're still able to remember to do it. Your body has muscle memory. It has ways of being able to reconnect with that learning, but you're not the master that you were. You have to practice that and have that opportunity. So that process of developing that over a time with a young child, and I'm talking 2, would be the same as in primary school. If, Greg, you are the first teacher to introduce something as elemental as fire, you are going to have to set some very strong expectations around how it will work. you'll have to have some clarity around this is a privilege, and this can't happen just because you'll want it. You have to actually respect the processes around this. And initially, you will have some kids, probably a little hōha, who will just spin off the other side, and you'll be going, okay, I knew that was going to happen, and what have I got in place to solve that, because I can't leave the fire. Now, we advocate fire in early childhood because there is something special and very elemental about fire. And when you say to adults, what do you do when you sit around a fire, or if you give them the opportunity to, they all start staring into it, and then you ask them to tell a story about themselves, and they go back in time, and you can see them leave their consciousness and they are drifting. And we constantly do that when we see yellow flame. Our brain is wired to see yellow light, to look for it. It's the same as the colour of the sun. In lots of our schools we have fluorescent lighting, white, vivid white. That lighting startles the brain. It's not good for it. So we are designed to look for yellow light. When we see it, like in a fire, we become entranced. 2-year-olds do too. So do 8-year-olds. And it continues all the way up. Now, what do we use fire for? Well, where Tara is, be for warmth. Where David is at the moment in Gisborne, it feels like it should be for warmth as well. We also use it for cooking. And so there is processes within. So what is it that we wish to cook? Now, children will say to you they want to do marshmallows over the fire. The only reason they want to do that is because adults have said that's what you do over a fire. Whereas if you start really asking them, our kids used to say roast chicken. Some of them would say things like soup. Milo became their favourite. And in the Milo making, it starts with, okay, so what are we going to need in the Milo? What's the recipe? I don't know. You just need Milo. Cool. So that's what we provide. And then they'll add to their thinking, and they might go, well, we might need milk, we might need sugar, we might need water, we might need, I don't know, instant pudding. And you add to their thinking. You allow them to create their recipes and then modify their recipes and then create thinking that works together. So whose recipe do you think is better? This person's or this person's? So if they were going to teach someone else how to make their Milo, what would they do to teach them that? What's the recipe here? So you're getting them to write their recipes, you're getting them to read their recipes, they're creating brand new recipes. And these are all preschoolers. So imagine what it would be like at school at that stage if you've got a rich experience like that. Every day we had a fire, the next day the children would walk in and go, is there a fire again? So we're not finished with it until they are.
Right.
So that's part of that journeying. So some things that we start with in play might be for a very short moment. Classic example would be seeing a teacher set up an obstacle course for play, thinking, oh, I'm going to get these kids to do all these amazing things through this obstacle course. It only works when the teacher is there. When the teacher moves away, the play fails. And it's to do with the fact this was set up by an adult again. This isn't anything to do with what they're interested in. So I suppose, like any risky situation, you assess the risks, you consider them, and you try and mitigate the situation. So a fire should never be lit unless there is copious quantities of water available right next door to it, to put it out, to immerse body parts in case someone does get burned. All of that process, because you have to assume the worst. Now, saying that, Greg, I've never had a child burnt in my care around a fire. We've never had to use the bucket because someone's burnt themselves. It's always been to put the fire out. So I think sometimes it's the adult's fear. And are those fears justified, or are we thinking that these fears manifest because suddenly our world is a riskier place? It's always been risky. And if you're a teacher now, you're a child that lived through that risk and survived it. What skills did you have to survive it? And are we making sure our kids have those skills to be able to survive into the future as well? We can't mollycoddle them.
Awesome
Sorry.
answer. Awesome answer. I love that. Are you there?
Just in case I missed bits.
Hey, there's one more question here. Oh, stupid internet. Question towards invitation. Personally, this is from Heke. I'm not a fan of regio type invitation, meaning very beautiful and aesthetic, which means a lot of work for the teacher. What does invitation look like in an organic play environment?
Okay, so an invitation in an organic play, and look, I would have to agree, I understand what she's saying about the regio environment. It's very Italian. Aesthetic is all and everything. An invitation to play would be as simple as, imagine outside your classroom there is some grass, a large area where they can go and run, a field maybe. And in the corner of the field, someone thoughtfully has put some hula hoops, and inside the hula hoops are 3 balls, and beside the balls is a large piece of material like an old sheet. No one has said what to do with it. No one has said how it must be used. There are no adults' rules yet. That invites children to explore and experience it. Inside a classroom, some of your classroom spaces are quite limited in availability of space. Imagine a large wooden tree stump. And on top of it, every day, a teacher brings something that they think will intrigue and challenge the mind of a child who may never have seen it. An example might be the old apple peelers that you put the apple in and you wind it to peel the apple. Now, for some children, that is quite magical because they've never seen it before. They've never experienced that. Imagine putting a cassette tape, for those of you old enough to understand what I'm saying, on a stump and getting them just to wonder. Now, the stump stays finite. It's predictable. It's known. The invitation sits on the top. What is this? What's it for? And it's not for the teacher to answer. The teacher doesn't go along and go, oh, look how you can use it. You can put an apple on here and you can peel away. Or back in the day, we used to listen to. No. It is allowing the child or children to come up with theories of mind, theories of what could be, and then considering what they might do to find out more about that thinking. And could this be around what the teacher may choose as possible lines of direction?
Wow. David, thank you so much. Our time's come to an end. I feel so encouraged, and you just filled my tank again, so thank you so much. It's really simple, isn't it?
It's not rocket science. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. But it's joyous.
Yes. And that yes. We started talking about that at the start. And you know, our New Zealand curriculum, its vision is to have confident, motivated, reliable, resourceful, resilient, connected, able to relate well to others, connected to the land and the environment, members of communities, actively involved, participants in a range of life contexts, contributors to the well-being of New Zealand, social, cultural, economic.
Good God.
lifelong learners,
Yep.
numeric, critical and creative thinkers, active seekers, users, creators of knowledge.
And you know what we say in early childhood instead?
What?
Our children are capable, competent thinkers, communicators, learners. Done. Oh my God, you've had people excited by words. Okay?
Yeah, but
everything we've just talked about,
yeah, it's that, right?
is that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has to be that. And it's the same thing. So what you guys are charged to do and what we are charged to do is identical.
It is.
And if you look at the key competencies of the curriculum, they were written by Margaret Carr. And Margaret Carr is one of the authors of Te Whāriki, the draft of our early childhood framework. And across the world, if you look at Habits of Mind, if you look at Guy Claxton's thinking, if you look at David Hirely's mind maps thinking, and all of these different strategies, they've all done research into what makes a person competent and capable long term into their future. How do we stay capable, competent? And it's not some of the curriculum subject areas.
That's right.
It's actually those big statements that are in the beginning of your curriculum.
That's right. Yes.
So wouldn't it be cool if we could look for progression of those things, defining individually within schools what that progression looks like? So if there's a progression about how I establish relationships, then part of that would show when I choose not to establish them or not to maintain them. The strategies I use to start the initial engagement, the strategies I use to maintain over time, and then to disentangle myself from those relationships. That's lifelong.
Yes.
You use those strategies all your life. Now, we've got a perfect chance of gifting children through their play more skills and strategies to do that. Yeah. Rather than going, this relationship's over and I'll text you.
Yes.
You know, we've got a better chance of getting it right, but we've got to take some ownership of it and advocate that. And when we've got Ero and a ministry telling us constantly, unless it's evidence-based, we don't give it any credit, we've got to challenge that.
Yeah.
So can I finish with, there's a beautiful quote in the original draft of Te Whāriki by two people, Egon Goober and Ivona Lincoln. And it comes from a book called Third Generation Assessment. And I believe the only copy of it is in Massey University Library. Really? Okay, so it's quite obscure, but it's it's referenced in the draft of Te Whāriki, 1996. And it said, it is the nature of, some people believe that what cannot be measured cannot be real. It is the nature of people, places, and things, which is what Te Whāriki is about, people, places, and things, that advantageous things cannot be measured. We cannot measure things such as curiosity. We cannot measure things such as passion. And it said it would be advantageous if all of these things could be measured. But it is the nature of things that they cannot. But just because you cannot measure them does not mean they are not true, does not mean they do not exist. And I think the challenge there is to take some of that thinking from people, I think, who are very, very wise back then and say, if that's the case, maybe we don't have an evidence-based model that says this is happening and that's happening, but actually trust that your child is developing this, and I can show you progression of their ability to share their passion. And look, you know, here's a child who some teachers don't think concentrates on anything particularly long, but look how long he was on that cable reel and made those paths for. This is an extended piece of concentration and focus. But I haven't got easy ways of being able to measure it against something that normalizes that.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we've got to leave some of our old assessment methodologies that aren't cognizant with the way we work and take back our profession.
Amen. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, David.
A pleasure.
Yeah. I'm going to stop the recording.